I'm Michael Portillo. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good evening, I'm Christopher Hope and this is GBN Tonight. Is the relationship between unions and Labour MPs a healthy one? It emerged today that since the election was called in May, 213 Labour MPs received £1.8 million in donations from union leaders. This comes after the government has been offering inflation-busting pay rises to millions of public sector workers, many of whom are members of unions. And it emerged today that the Labour government is looking at a new law to ensure that trade unions will be free to strike, even if most of their members do not vote for one. And a small, peaceful anti-immigration protest prompted officers from 5 different police forces, including the Met, to swarm to Bournemouth town centre. Is this adequate resourcing or a knee-jerk reaction after the riots which followed the killings in Southport? And as part of Labour's plan to overhaul workers' rights, employees contacted outside of office hours may be entitled to compensation. But what will the right to switch off mean for businesses? Or is this a sop to Gen Z workers who don't like being bothered by their bosses when they are chillaxing? All of that to come, so do get in touch with your thoughts on tonight's topics by going to gbnews.com/your say. But first, here's the news with Sophia Wensler.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening from the GB newsroom. It's just gone 7 o'clock. Your top story this hour. British tech tycoon Mike Lynch and his daughter are among 6 tourists missing after a luxury yacht sank in a tornado off the coast of Sicily. The British-registered 56-metre Bayesian had 22 people on board when it went down after being struck by the tornado. A body believed to be that of the vessel's cook has now been found. Divers are now combing the waters as the search efforts continue around the wreck, which is 50 metres underwater. So far, 15 people have been rescued, including the wife of Mike Lynch and a one-year-old girl. Back in the UK, in Manchester, a 43-year-old woman has died and 2 others are in a critical condition following a triple stabbing. A 22-year-old man, believed to be known to the victims, has been arrested on suspicion of murder. Greater Manchester Police are appealing for witnesses as they continue their investigation into what they say is an isolated incident. Meanwhile, there'll be no punishment for anyone handing zombie knives and machetes into police stations ahead of a new ban. Restrictions come in next month. The government stopped short of making ninja swords illegal, but insists that will happen soon. Policing Minister Dame Diana Johnson says the public should do the right thing and surrender any dangerous weapon. Prisons Minister Lord Timpson says he's inherited a justice system in crisis as plans to address overcrowding in jails are activated in Northern England. Operation Early Dawn will see defendants who are remanded in custody, waiting for a court appearance, held in police cells for longer. It's separate to the early release scheme for some offenders, which kicks in next month. More than half of people think Britain's heading in the wrong direction, as an opinion poll suggests a drop in support for the new Labour government. An equal percentage of adults have a favourable or unfavourable view of Sir Keir Starmer, with 38% on both sides. Rishi Sunak and the Conservatives, though, ratings haven't changed since the election. The Tories' Deputy Chairman, Matthew Vickers, has resigned. He stepped back from the role to support Robert Jenrick as the next Conservative leader. He says Jenrick is the standout candidate with a compelling vision for rebuilding the party. And the Democratic National Convention kicks off in Chicago later today, where Kamala Harris will be officially announced as the party's nominee for the US presidential election. Last month, Donald Trump was confirmed as the Republicans' pick just a few days after surviving an assassination attempt. Americans will head to the polls in November. Those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Sophia Wensler. More in an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Welcome back. Now, there's been a slew of stories about Labour MPs benefiting from unions' largesse. Since 2019, Labour cabinet ministers have received over £480,000 in union donations. In addition, just since the election was called in May, 213 Labour MPs, newly elected, have received an amazing £1.8 million in donations from union leaders. Is this a problem? Well, it comes after Labour has announced inflation-busting pay rises for millions of public sector workers. Many of them are in unions. And the government is now reportedly looking at repealing trade union legislation from 2016, passed by the last Conservative government, which will make it easier to go on strike. And joined now by former Labour Minister Sean Simon. Sean, welcome to GBN tonight. Great to see you. Thanks for coming on. What do unions want in return for their money?
They want Labour government. That's why they fund Labour election campaigns. I mean, it averages at £9,000 per elected MP. And let's look at what a union is. Unions are associations of millions of ordinary working people, generally not very rich people, just ordinary working people who explicitly opt in to contribute a little bit of the subs they pay for political campaigning, for uses exactly like this. And it's very highly regulated and it's completely transparent. So those Labour MPs get an average of 9k each from these associations of workers who choose to do this with their hard-earned cash. You will be hard-pressed to find a Tory MP who didn't get a lot more than 9k during the election campaign from all kinds of people that nobody's asking any questions about just because they don't happen to be trade unions.
If a company boss gives 9,000 or 20,000, because of course money comes from all over the place, is that different? A company boss has got employees and is worried about taxation and other issues. Unions are worried about employment rights. Is it the same transaction?
No, it's quite a different transaction because the union transaction, and as I say, all a union is just millions of ordinary people clubbing together to have a bit more power and a bit more clout than they have as individuals, and using a little bit of, a load of people who earn 30 grand a year don't get an opportunity to sponsor many MPs. But if they each contribute £1 a month to fund political causes, and there are millions of them, then they can actually help fund Labour candidates in election. And Labour candidates in elections, traditionally, far, far less well-funded than Conservative candidates. This election was the first one for a long time when, during the election, Labour actually got far more funds in than the Tories did. But it wasn't mainly for the unions. From the unions, this election was the first in many years when the union funding was a very small minority of Labour funding. They got money from all over the place. But the Tories didn't, because everyone knew they were going to lose.
When you were an MP, Sean, did you get any donations from unions? And what did they want in return?
I did, not as much as the sums that we're talking about here, but they used to have things then, I think they were called constituency development plans, and it was something like a couple of grand a year would go to your local constituency. And as I say, it would be about trade unions, associations of normal, ordinary working people choosing to pool their money to support Labour candidates and Labour MPs because they believe that Labour government is always better for working people. And the reason they believe that, and the reason they're prepared to put their money where their mouth is that it is. It's true.
So what were you asked to do in return? Were you asked to open an office in your constituency, meet with union reps, talk to them about advancing union issues in Parliament?
I was never asked to do anything in return directly. I was never asked to do anything in return that I wouldn't have done anyway. So I did meet with union reps and listen to unions' concerns. But I would have done that if they hadn't given £2,000 to the constituency, just as the half of Labour MPs that haven't been funded during the election campaign will also be meeting trade unionists and listening to their concerns. That's just, that's good government.
And is it right to draw a line between what the government's doing, pay rises for lots of unionised public sector workers, maybe repealing Tory legislation to make it easier to go on strike? I mean, we're all born in the real world, aren't we, Sean? I mean, money's being passed over, things are happening in government, or am I being overly cynical, a cynical journalist?
It pains me to say so, but I think you might be, Christopher. I think you might be. I mean, let's look at that Tory strike legislation. The truth is that we've had more strikes under the Tories than we ever did under the previous Labour government, 10 times more. More strikes last year under the Conservative governments than they had in France. And you know that there's strikes have gone AOI when that's the case. And this Labour government will get these strikes down. There's no doubt about that. And one of the ways they'll do that is just by making reasonable pay deals, again, with hard-working people, public sector workers, who've been badly paid and squeezed at a really difficult time on the Conservatives, and who actually deserve a pay rise.
Well, Sean Simon, thank you for joining us tonight on GBN Tonight. To you first, Nigel Nelson, is Sean right? There's nothing wrong with this. It's all part of the democratic process.
Well, yes. I mean, the Tories get it from big business. I mean...
and they want things to do in the return, don't they?
Well, they do. They get peerages. I mean, back in February, the two of the peers that Rishi Sunak put forward, one had given the Tory party £120,000, another one £35,000. That seems quite cheap for a peerage, by the way.
They would deny all these things, by the way. You can't buy peerages.
Yes, of course not. Absolutely. But it is a transaction. But the whole thing about Labour is the clues of the name. It is the Labour Party and the Labour movement, and it started with the trade unions and continues with them.
Do you have a problem with Mutaz Ahmed from The Telegraph?
I do. Trade unions, they don't just give money. They help Labour MPs get selected. They help elect a Labour leader. Many Labour MPs are former trade union reps. It's a revolving door. And we act as if these unions represent half the country. They represent 22% of the workforce. What about the other 78% who just want to get to work and are blocked by train strikes? Who's representing them? I think it's a very strange setup. Yes, the Labour Party was designed to be the political wing of the trade union movement, but the world has changed. No one's sweeping chimneys anymore. Workers' rights are pretty much where they should be in the Western world. It is just a very strange system.
But the alternative would be the taxpayer funding it. I mean, do we want ordinary people to actually pay through their taxes to fund political parties? We have to accept the money must come from somewhere. For the Tories, it's traditionally been wealthy people and big business. For Labour, it's traditionally been the trade unions because, as Mutaz says, that's how they started life, and they've continued with that kind of alliance.
And they pursue their agenda, don't they? In the same way
so both sides will pursue an agenda. Labour is there for what used to be the urban working class. Now they call it working people. That's who the unions represent.
There's a very important distinction here. Businesses employ millions of people in this country.
The unions represent millions of people.
The unions don't employ anyone.
No, but they represent people.
But they have their own political agendas that are sometimes detached from their own memberships.
Well, I mean, I would imagine that an employer may well have an agenda detached from his employees.
They want to grow their business and employ more people.
I'm sure they do, but that's nothing to do with politics, has it? That they may choose to support the Tories for whatever reason that they think that will be of benefit. Yes, and the unions do the same. The unions are representing people.
An employer's interest is in growing their company and generating more wealth for the UK economy. A trade union's interest, well, last year, it was blocking the UK economy, stopping people from going to work.
But the primary job of a trade union is to represent its members and to get the best deal possible for those members. Trade unions tend to believe they will get a better deal, not necessarily the best one, through a Labour government. That's why they support it.
If they want to represent their members, why are they so against legislation that requires half their members to be in the room to vote for a strike? That seems anti-democratic.
Because it's been very difficult to call strikes. What you're talking about there is to make sure that more than 50% of people within a union actually vote one way or the other.
Isn't that democratic?
One way or the other. Well, the question is why the other people don't vote. If they felt strongly enough about not striking, they would vote not to strike.
Well, clearly they don't feel strongly enough to strike.
In the same way that people don't feel strongly enough to vote for a government in this country, which is a great pity.
Right. Nigel, are we heading towards not a winter of discontent, but some years of a spiralling wage inflation from these demands? We've seen doctors 22%, train drivers 14%, public sector workers over 3 years.
Over 3 years.
5 and 5 and 5, or 5 and 5. There's certainly more than inflation each year, as is forecast.
Well, as inflation, it's not more than what it was, because we're talking about pay claims that are going back to when inflation was 11%. So this is making up for a lot of that. I don't think you'll see a huge amount of wage inflation, but what you are seeing is proper deals, which mean we'll get fewer strikes, which is much better for the economy.
We'll get fewer strikes by throwing tons of taxpayer cash at this 22%.
And save tons of taxpayer cash by not having strikes.
Just look at West Streeting, right? I'm not saying it's directly connected, but he took money from trade unions to print leaflets during the election, and now we see an extraordinary pay rise for junior doctors.
Well, he's not here to defend himself.
No, he's not. I'm not saying it's directly related, but it raises eyebrows.
Yeah, I don't think these things are linked. The point about the pay deals they've come across, say teachers and nurses 5.5%, does that seem hugely unreasonable given the money that they've lost over the years, plus the inflation they've been going through? That has settled a dispute simply by getting down and sitting down and talking to them.
Everyone has suffered from that inflation, right? And other pay deals are ridiculous. Over 20% for junior doctors over 2 years is ridiculous. There's a sense that this trade union money is skewing policy, that this government is prioritising the 22% over 78%, and that may be to the detriment of the UK economy.
Well, at the moment, fingers crossed, we won't get any more strikes. I know that the train drivers want one small one, nothing to do with this pay deal.
That's the LNER.
That's right, yes.
Well, they were about managers breaking a strike last time, aren't they?
That's right, yeah. Last time round that they threatened the minimum service level, which was about to be scrapped. And then the union turned around and said, OK, we'll make a one-day strike 5 days. That's fine.
Taking a step back before we go to the break, is it wrong that Labour looks like it's sorting out its supporters with pay rises and watering down anti-striking legislation? Because it's meant to govern for the whole country, isn't it? Yeah,
that's right. And the argument is that they would be doing just that. But we go back then to the whole business of funding, that a lot of Labour funding, not the majority this time round, but a lot of it comes from the unions, as a lot from the Tories from big business. Until we actually change the funding model, yes, you're left with
Just very quickly, there are two ways to stop strikes. One is to legislate against them, which is what the Tories tried, and the other is to throw tons of taxpayer cash at them.
The right
one
to strike
is cheaper than the other.
Okay,
one's much cheaper than the other.
We'll have to hold it there. Go on strike during the break, but not now. Thank you to my panel. Up next, was a police response to a recent protest in Bournemouth a knee-jerk reaction? Plus, is it ever right for a leading politician to take a holiday? Back soon.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans, and this is GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Now, we've got a story and a half to tell you and bring you now. Our very own GB News political correspondent, who we love very much, Catherine Foster, joins us in the studio, and she's smiling, but she wasn't smiling for the past few days.
Two of her sons, Matthew and Andrew, were reported missing in Bali.
I got a text from a friend saying, can you give us a call, a bit worried about them. Then spoke to a girl they'd befriended who was in Sweden, but they'd met on their travels. And she told me that they'd gone up the mountain. By the time I found out, they'd been missing for 30 hours. They'd gone up the mountain on the Tuesday night, British time. This was the Thursday morning, without a guide. And they'd told her it was really hard. and she told them to turn back, but they hadn't, and they'd sent screenshots from this app with this trail that they were following on the app, screenshots of the app in case there was a problem, and a Snapchat of a Matthew avatar at the top. And she said, I know they made it to the top because I could see that his phone had nearly died. But the trail had actually closed many years ago. So the app, we will need to make sure that that gets taken off the app. But, you know, technology saved them in the end because it was the screenshots and it was the messages that they'd sent, but they should never have been without a guide.
But what were you doing during those 30 hours that Mum couldn't, when the phone died and Mum couldn't get in touch? Where were you? What were you up to?
Well, we were trying to figure out the best course of action, because it started to pour with rain. The amount of rain created a river, like a stream.
Yeah.
We were like, oh,
yeah,
let's follow the stream downhill, and then the sun set, and we just had to like sleep in the bushes in the jungle.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Acquia. This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Christopher Hope. Now, police officers from 5 different forces patrolled a small anti-immigration protest in Bournemouth yesterday. Roughly 200 anti-immigration protesters were met by a similar number of counter-protesters, like Stand Up to Racism. Dorset Police said the demonstration was peaceful and that there were no reports of disorder. However, officers from Dorset Police were joined by colleagues from the Met Police, Thames Valley, Hampshire, Avon and Somerset and Devon and Cornwall as part of a mutual aid agreement. Dorset Police were also granted extra powers to stop and search protesters and disperse individuals ahead of the rally. Is the strength of this police response a knee-jerk reaction to the disorder we've seen recently in recent weeks, or an appropriate level of resourcing? Joining me now to discuss this is the former Minister and former MP for Bournemouth West, Sir Conor Burns. Conor, welcome to GBN Tonight.
Good evening.
Great to see you. Was that policing proportionate?
I think there's big questions about it. In the end, it was 2 relatively small groups engaged in a sort of standoff with each other. 5 forces, 5 different forces descending on Bournemouth town centre to the town hall. I have to say, you know, local residents will be delighted to see police in Bournemouth town centre. We've been trying for years to get the police onto the beat in Bournemouth town centre to deal with the aggressive begging and the drinking and the drug dealing and so on. But I did think it looked a little bit over the top.
Do you understand, though, why police are nervous because of what's been happening in those dozen or so towns and cities around England, and also we've seen trouble in Northern Ireland? They just want to make sure that in the first whiff of it, they're straight in there to make sure nothing happens.
Well, there's trouble all the time in Northern Ireland. The police in Northern Ireland are policing an imperfect peace with deep remaining sectarian divisions between a very divided community in Northern Ireland. I think there's sometimes a concern that there is an elevation of some of this by the police reaction and by political reaction. And I think it's really, really important in all of this that the police are even-handed and appropriate in their response to all crimes, to all disturbances, and to all protests, because it eats at the integrity of the police if the public come to believe that there are different rules for different people in society.
Well, Conor, you're going towards that term two-tier policing by saying that, aren't you? Do you think there is, or have you seen two-tier policing? Would you had 5 forces going to police, for example, a pro-Palestinian protest, to take one example, in recent months?
Look, I've seen some of these demonstrations in London, and I've seen things chanted, things said, placards waved. that I would imagine most people looking at them would think were incitement to hatred or indeed even violence, and the police have been standing observing that. I'm not sure I want to get into the most recent ones with the so-called Palestinian marches, but go back to the height of the COVID restrictions. We had the former head of the Metropolitan Police, taking the knee with officers without too much social distancing going on, and yet clamping down amazingly strongly on ordinary members of the public going about their business, but allegedly not following the rather draconian restrictions. If the public start to believe that there is one set of rules for one people and another for them, then you start to gnaw away at policing by consent, and that is the way in which our...
Conor Burns, I've got to ask you also about the Conservative leadership contest. I think I've lost Conor Burns there with my key question. I'll ask you the question, Nigel Nelson. Are you standing for the Tory leadership? You're not, are you?
Here we go. No,
just checking.
Unfortunately not.
Kemi Badenoch is one of 6 candidates for the Tory leadership. She didn't go to a hustings in Yorkshire this weekend. 5 candidates did. Is that OK? She's on a family holiday, which is,
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I do think that politicians should, in fact, have a holiday.
OK.
They should spend time with their family, and I think it was hypocritical of the Conservative Party during the election to have a go at Keir Starmer as a part-time Prime Minister because he wants to spend Friday nights with his family. I think it's important for everybody.
That was because his wife's Jewish and they observe the Jewish rituals.
That's right, yes. But the idea, I mean, I'm not sure he'll ever be able to get off at 6 o'clock in the evening after he's been in the job for a while. But anyway, I think it was quite right that he had aimed for that, in the same way that Kemi Badenoch's perfectly entitled to a holiday. She should take it. It's a leadership contest. It's not the end of the world either way, whatever happens, because they're not going to be governing the country. So it's a matter for her. If she thinks it damages her leadership chances and doesn't care, forget it.
I think we have lost Conor Burns, Mutaz, but let's have a look at what he said on Twitter. He said, I'll read it out for listeners on the radio, that he would text Kemi Badenoch from 6 a.m. until 11 p.m. and she replied, Kemi works hard and needs a break. Her kids deserve that, as does Hamish. I imagine Hamish is the husband of Kemi Badenoch. Is this right? You just want to chillax a bit?
I'm afraid
not worry about it?
I'm tougher on politicians. I think if you want to be Prime Minister at some point and there's a hustings on the way there, you should go to that hustings, especially if it's in the north, which is fertile ground for any future Tory coalition. Boris showed in 2019 the rewards you can get out of it. Don't miss a hustings if you want to be Prime Minister. Stay in the country. Go and campaign. Keir Starmer could have taken a holiday after the general election where he worked very hard, probably worked harder than Kemi Badenoch because he was running as a leader. He couldn't take it because of the riots.
He also hasn't taken a holiday this month. He was meant to be away last week.
That's right, yes.
He spent time in Downing Street and Chequers, where there was, I think there's a swimming pool. I haven't been there before, but I think you can have a nice time in. But anyway, he was working in the UK.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the whole thing is quite clearly he couldn't take a holiday. He had one planned. The riots came along. No way a Prime Minister can walk away from that. I mean, Mutter's mentioned Boris Johnson, who loved holidays. He used to be on holiday all the time when he was Prime Minister. But I just think that you live up to your responsibilities. I don't think missing a hustings, frankly, is that important.
No, but Boris Johnson...
It matters to Tory members. I think as soon as Tory members get a whiff of arrogance or complacency, they will turn. I mean, a lot of people think she's ahead in the leadership campaign, but there are others coming in the wing. Robert Jenrick's coming very fast. She might be overtaken if this carries on.
But that's really sort of her problem, really, what she puts first, whether it's the Tory leadership or her own family.
Well, Mutaz, also Conor Burns said on X, since the election, I've realised how tired I was. Politics is remorseless. Are we expecting too much from our elected leaders?
I mean, MPs get lots of time off. They get lots of recess.
Donning my own break, you're saying,
couldn't she have picked another week?
Nigel?
Yeah, well, I mean, what the MPs will tell you is that during the recess they're working really, really hard gathering their constituencies. But I mean, obviously, if you want to be a politician, it is a 24/7 job. I understand that. No harm to have a break in between when you can get it. I have to say that I do think politicians do work quite hard.
OK. Listen, well, Nigel Nelson and Mutaz Ahmed, thank you very much for joining us today on tonight on GBN Tonight. Coming up, Labour's switch-off plans could see an employer paying out to staff for contacting them out of hours. I know it's after 7 o'clock. That's next.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Plenty of showers as we go through tomorrow and some blustery, gusty winds too. But before then, there's a lot of cloud, there's a lot of rain because of a frontal system that's already made its way in from the west. And as we go through the next 12 hours or so, it's going to continue to push east and southeastwards, bringing quite a wet story across many parts of England and Wales for a time, with that rain feeding into the southeast as we go through the early hours of tomorrow morning. Behind it, there will be some clear skies around, but also some showery bursts, especially across parts of Scotland. Temperatures not dropping a huge amount. In fact, in the southeast, it is going to be another warm night, some places only falling to lows of around 17 or 18 Celsius. As we go through tomorrow morning, though, there will be some hefty rain across the far east of Scotland and the Northern Isles. Also, plenty of showers feeding into western parts of Scotland. In between, something a little bit drier and brighter for some, but also more showers across Northern Ireland, some parts of northern, northwestern England, and in fact, down the western side of England and Wales, there'll be some showers feeding in. Something a little bit drier and sunnier for more central eastern parts of England, although in the far southeast, that front will be lingering here for a time, so a grey, damp start to the day for some before that front clears away by the afternoon. Behind it, for many, it is going to be a showery day, and some of those showers will be heavy, and there are some gusty, blustery winds to watch out for too, especially in the northwest, making it feel a little bit cooler for some, but there will also be some sunny spells, and in the east-southeast, in the sunshine, feeling quite warm with temperatures in the low to mid-20s. Wednesday gets off to a fine start for many of us, but some very wet and windy weather is going to feed in from the northwest as we go through the day, particularly affecting Scotland and perhaps Northern Ireland too. Now, the rain is going to be quite heavy and will last as we go into Thursday, and it's all due to the remnants of what was Hurricane Ernesto, the other side of the Atlantic. I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Your lunchtime update on the stories that matter across the UK.
From breaking news and insightful analysis, inspiring stories and lively debates. You're comparing yourself to a former Prime Minister.
Which is it? Stay informed, stay updated, stay entertained.
I just don't know how anyone would not want to be there.
Every weekday from midday.
We are Good Afternoon Britain, only on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Christopher Hope. Will workers' free time finally be their own? The Labour government wants to introduce a legal right not to be bothered so that staff can ignore bosses' emails and texts and calls outside of normal office hours, including holidays. It's all part of Labour's election pledge to give everybody a right to switch off for the first time ever. What do you do to stop your boss bothering you out of hours? Do let me know. gbnews.com/your say, and I'll try and read out the most appropriate. Joining me now is my panel, GB News' senior political commentator Nigel Nelson and Telegraph's associate editor Mutaz Ahmed. Mutaz, do you ever turn your phone off?
I don't.
But you're a journalist, so you can't afford to. But if you work in a call centre or a job which doesn't involve being always on it for the information, you've got a more conventional job, it's right, isn't it, that you can turn your phone off?
I think often if you work in a call centre, you probably can turn your phone off. You're answering calls all day, and a lot of your business isn't done on a mobile phone, it's done on a telephone at work. I think if you want to work in banking, if you want to be a senior journalist, if you want to work in a high-functioning job that pays well in the end, you have to keep your phone off. I know this is being branded as a Gen Z thing. I'm Gen Z. I was born in 98.
Gen Z is defined as being born in
97
to 2012.
To 2012. Look, take advantage of this, right? Some of your colleagues might want a right to switch off at 5 p.m. Take advantage of it. The workplace is competitive. If you work longer hours, you're more likely to get a promotion. That's how it works.
Nigel Nelson, this idea is inspired by policies in France where the right to disconnect has been enshrined in law since 2017. Is it right, though? If you're a young, thrusting, young 20-something in the workplace, you want to be always on it and then talk to the boss and get good.
I mean, it won't be compulsory, so if you want to connect up with your boss, that's fine. It depends what job you do. We work in news, the three of us. News goes on all the time. It would be ridiculous to think that we could ever leave our emails or a phone call alone, because we don't know what's about to happen next. Same with an emergency worker. But say you're working in a clerical job or a manual job, if it's absolutely 9 to 5 and your job is over by then, there's no reason why you should be contacted by your boss except in an emergency. And bear in mind, this is not, it's not a criminal offence for bosses to do it. What Labour are looking at is whether or not, if a boss harassed an employee with loads of emails that they shouldn't have sent, and it ended up as an unfair dismissal claim at a tribunal, the tribunal will take that into account within the compensation. So that's as far as...
So punish the employer
right.
with... Yeah. If you're a working mum and your hours are really strict, or you're a working dad, you've got to be out by 5 to get the kids at 6 and feed them. This kind of thing is a protection.
Well, no, negotiate that with your employer, right? Most employers are sympathetic to these things. I think this is just another layer of red tape and bureaucracy. Right? Is an employer now going to feel nervous about contacting someone at 8 p.m. if there is a crisis in the business? It depends what you call an emergency. An emergency for an employer might be losing £1,000 or £2,000 over something. Will they then feel nervous about contacting someone?
Yeah, but I mean, and that would be, in this particular case, it would be an industrial tribunal then decide that. I mean, there are extremes here. In Portugal, it's an £8,500 fine if you make contact with one of your employees outside office hours. You then go to the other end of the scale, Ireland, and all that the employer has to do there is put a little note at the end of the email saying, I'm sending this at a time of my choosing. You don't have to open it. When you get back to work, it's fine. That kind of idea. So somewhere in between is where Labour are going.
Where did all this start, Mutaz? Did it start with COVID, work from home? I mean, you've confessed you're a Gen Z.
Yeah.
Is that because people nowadays, they want to... they don't want to live to work, they want to work to live. Your job is a way of getting cash to go and spend on avocados.
It did start with COVID. People are more relaxed about work. I'm able to come in here dressed like this because...
You're very well developed.
I think before COVID I would have worn a three-piece suit and I'll come in dressed casually.
Yeah, I'm wearing a tie, by the way. I'm like Nigel.
I've got rid of the tie since COVID.
I think things like this don't hurt, but when it comes to legislation, you've got to be careful because it leads to ridiculous situations. I remember during the Euros when England was playing Spain, one of the Spanish footballers was 17 years old. I think the Spanish FA had to pay a fine because in Germany, a 17-year-old shouldn't work after 8 p.m. or something like that.
And the game started at 9 p.m. local time.
Exactly. So we need to be careful with laws because they often just lead to more red tape, more regulation. When these things are dealt with person to person, much better.
Well, the idea would be a contract between the employer and the employee. So the sensible way of doing it, I mean, ACAS will come up with the form of words. The sensible way of doing it will be for a code of conduct within a workplace so you know exactly where you stand.
You mentioned ACAS, tribunals. I mean, does this help the working environment?
Will it damage productivity, the big thing which the Tories talk about all the time?
I think all unnecessary regulation damages productivity.
But perhaps we might be happier, Nigel Nelson. Perhaps we know that the boss can't bother us after hours. We can just chill out.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably get nervous if I wasn't getting emails and phone calls coming through. I'd be wondering what's going on. But yeah, I mean, for some people, if they've got a family life and they want to spend that uninterrupted, this is the best way forward.
Mutaz, you agreed?
If I switch off at 5 p.m. and I'm editing the pages of a paper...
Yeah, we're different, though.
We might
you can't use journalism. I mean, most people aren't journalists. Well, most people do have jobs where they want to just the boss can clear off and down the pub.
Well, if you want a high-functioning job, you're going to have to work long hours and you get paid for it. If you work at a hedge fund, sometimes you don't leave until 1 or 2 a.m. You get paid for it. If you want an easy life, pick another job. You'll get paid less.
Do you think, as Mutaz says, there might be an advantage to let your co-workers sign up for the out of hours, do not disturb sign, and then you volunteer with your hand up. You call me any time, boss.
Yeah, I'm sure you'll have that sort of office politics playing out, but you get that anyway.
It's good. It's competition. I think some people will take advantage.
But it won't be compulsory. I keep saying it doesn't mean you won't be allowed to send an email.
I'm just saying, if you want to take up this opportunity, beware, because some of your younger colleagues might be prepared
may well
to
try and go ahead of it, yeah.
Exactly, to reply to those emails.
But that happens in the workplace anyway, doesn't it? I mean, in all workplaces.
We are seeing a big change, aren't we, with this Labour government? A lot more employment rights. I mean, is that a worry for employers, Mutaz might say? Or?
Well, it's always employers don't like anything that may affect their profits. So I can't think of a single measure that's been brought in that they haven't sort of squealed about. When the minimum wage came in, they were against that.
As with CBI, I mean, all in
the CBI eventually came round. But they were originally against that. So the whole thing, when it finally came in, it didn't cost the 2 million jobs that I think Michael Howard predicted. So on the basis of that, we get used to all this new stuff coming in. I think people should have rights at work.
Isn't Nigel right? We've moved on from the Thatcherite days of getting rid of employment rights. I mean,
well, it's not really getting rid of them, but the world is changing. We live in a 24-hour world now, and profit is good, and businesses should be able to maximise them. And anything that disrupts profits, we need to scrutinise.
Profit is good, but it's shared.
I'm going to pause you both there, out of office hours. With me now is the Head of Employment at Pickering Solicitors, Joanna Robson. Joanna, thanks for joining us tonight. Do you mind being called out of hours?
No, not at all. That's the job. No, absolutely not. No, it's it's lovely to meet you, Christopher. Thank you for inviting me onto your show.
It's great to have you on. I mean, Nigel Nelson here is saying that really employers who bring this in will just face paying out more in an employment tribunal if they break the rules they're setting up for themselves. It's really it's not really a problem in that sense.
In terms of the right to time off, you mean the right to Yeah, so in terms of that, there isn't going to be a standalone right, I don't think. Of course, it's still very early days. We don't quite know yet what's going to happen, or how the code of practice is going to actually be drafted. But we are really, at this stage, I think we're believing that there's going to be no standalone claim. So I guess somebody could bring a claim, and it could enhance the amount being paid out to an employee if an employer falls foul of the law in terms of that right to finish, finish, switch off from work.
Is it one that young people want to do? Do you see in your time in your legal practice? Do you see it wanted by Mutaz in the studio here mentioned Gen Z people born within 97 and 2012? Is it younger people, or the older dinosaurs like Nigel Nelson next to me think it's all ridiculous? Is it a generational issue?
Yes, I think there is a generational issue. I think younger people, they generally want to make a really good impression. So sometimes you find the younger workforce are the ones that actually want to really put their mark out there, and they really want to work longer hours. And that's going to, it's going to be difficult for younger people to, switch off. Younger people don't generally, well, they do, but it's less often that, say, 18-year-olds have family commitments, which is the work-life balance which Labour is striving to achieve by reason of this new deal for working people to get that work-life balance.
Yes, has your approach towards work changed, do you think, since the COVID pandemic? More people work from home, Nigel won't wear a tie, Mutaz is dressed for a nightclub. It's all different nowadays.
Yeah, absolutely. More people work from home. I mean, a quarter of workers in the UK now, they work hybridly. So they work in the office, so they have a presence and they still have that team morale. But then you have, there's a large proportion of people that do work from home. But in a way, working from home can have its dangers as well, because you can be in an environment where you don't feel you're at work. You could be working from the kitchen table, for example. So you're not necessarily aware that you're working, and suddenly you've clocked up 14 hours before you realise it, and then you're suffering from burnout, which is then leading to mental health problems.
Well, listen, Joanna Robson, thank you for joining us. You're the Head of Employment at Pickering Solicitors. Great to have you here. In a moment, we'll go live to Chicago, where Kamala Harris is to be formally made the Democratic's presidential candidate as the contest between her and Donald Trump heats up. That's next.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Joined now by the founder of Quintet London, Tanta Masulishvili, who channels her experience and fervour for fashion into her innovative brands which produce artworks on silk. You brought in some lovely things which we'll discuss in just a moment. Tell me a little bit about the complexity of printing an artist's idea onto silk. Is that a difficult thing to do?
It's actually very simple because we just simply ask our clients a set of questions to find out what they like, their experiences, their favorite objects or anything they desire. We create out of this information preliminary sketch, show it to clients until it's perfect. We change it according to their needs.
Are you saying that everything that you're doing here is personalised to a client? It's a commission from a client?
Every single piece is totally unique. We make each individual piece for the client taste. So every single piece is totally different. And what is nice, for example, we do like wedding favors, corporate gifts, investors' gifts, and every single time we would match the theme throughout to the actual company theme and so on.
Now here we have a series of little silk ties. Am I right to call them ties?
This one's actually called twillies. Twilly.
Yes. I didn't know the word twilly.
Yes.
These have a name. So this is the name of your client in this case. This one is Amanda, I think.
Exactly. So actually these are our signature design. So if you want to give someone something quickly, but just simply add their names, you can order from our website and you just simply need to insert their name and we can produce it on your favorite color combination. But then obviously our main product is totally unique pieces which are bespoke.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Are the newspapers getting you down?
My wife didn't divorce me that month.
Struggling to separate the wheat from the chaff?
I know that it's a bit of a circus at the best of times.
Well, don't worry, Headliners has got you covered. We'll take the burden of reading the day's news, and if we get depressed, who cares? It's an occupational hazard, frankly. That's Headliners on GB News from 11 p.m. till midnight, and the following morning, 5 till 6 a.m. on GB News, the comedy channel. Nah, just kidding. Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to GBN Tonight with me, Christopher Hope. You being in touch in your, well, lots, in touch with your views. I asked you to let me know what you do to stop your boss bothering you out of hours. Fred says, I've had phone calls from my boss while laying in A&E. Richard says, even some of us at the bottom, in quotes, prefer to take responsibility too and be kept in the loop. Not often I agree with Nigel, but he has it spot on tonight. One viewer, unnamed, says, story, same as usual. Those who are more flexible will climb the ladder. Those who don't, won't. And a fourth viewer says, a person unprepared to deal with office work out of hours would most likely not be the sort of person to find themselves in that position in the first place. Right, moving on. After weeks of uncertainty of who is going to take on Donald Trump, today the Democrats will unveil their candidate to beat the former Republican president, Donald Trump. Kamala Harris at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago will be unveiled later tonight. It's running from today until Thursday. And now this evening, President Biden will give an emotional address where he will urge delegates to get behind Kamala Harris. Later this week, we'll hear from former Presidents Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. I'm very pleased to be joined right now by the former Democratic presidential hopeful, Jason Palmer. Jason, thank you for joining us tonight on GB News. You're planning to stand. Great to see you. You're planning to stand against Joe Biden. Are you happy you've got Kamala Harris?
Absolutely. Actually, when I look back to 2019, Kamala Harris was the first candidate that I donated to, and the main reason I entered the race was because I thought Biden should pass the torch to a younger generation of leaders. And that's exactly what he's done. And that's why there's this huge outpouring of energy from everyone in the Democratic Party, from independents. I saw more Republicans actually coming out today and endorsing Kamala as well.
And do you think that she'll go down well? I mean, there are people who think that she won't do that well against Donald Trump in these key TV debates, which seem to set so much of the temperature now in the US.
I think it's actually going to be tough, both the debates and the actual election. You know, polls keep coming out every day, and it has Kamala up by 2 or 3 percentage points. Sometimes Trump is up by 1 or 2 percentage points. It's a nail biter. It's a very close election, and I do think that debate that's coming up in September is going to be a crucial deciding factor.
We're sitting here in the UK watching agog while this election campaign ramps up. On her application to join a campaign team, Kamala Harris has offered 9 different pronoun options. Is that necessary?
That's not an issue that I really lean into. I've been more excited about the fact that she's talking about small businesses, the economy, about freedom. Like, these are the values that animate me. I'm a purple candidate. I'm a Democrat by background, but I'm running an organization called Together now that's endorsing both Democratic and Republican candidates and independents for office. So I love that she's leaning into some of the Republican messaging and issues as well.
We've got some of those pronouns on the screen now. Tim Walz has been announced as Kamala Harris's running mate. Is he the right choice? He kind of helps to deal with those people who may want to go towards Trump again.
Tim Walz wasn't someone that I knew very well when she announced him. I was more of a Josh Shapiro kind of guy for the small business, economic growth reasons I was just talking about. But now that I've gotten to know him, I've seen him speak. He's actually quite a compelling character. You know, he's a little bit it's like having Coach on the team, and that gets people excited that care a lot about sports and care a lot about winning.
Jason Palmer, did you worry, though, that we are seeing the honeymoon of the early days of Kamala Harris being selected by the party, and she hasn't really faced any kind of real battles? She's not doing many TV interviews, for example, as you know. She's being hidden away. Yeah. At some point, you've got to get her out there and face a bit of enemy fire, and will she wilt or will she survive?
I do agree with you on that. I've been encouraging that she should be out there doing those interviews every single day, especially prior to the debate. I mean, this is why one of the reasons why Biden did so poorly in that debate is they were protecting him. They were not letting him be out there. They were not letting him work on his weaknesses. We need to make sure Kamala gets out there. And I do agree with you. This is something that she needs to do much more of in advance of the debate. And this is kind of a honeymoon period. That's why I do think this is going to be a close election all the way up to the finish line. Yeah. I'm focusing on getting out younger voters. I think younger voters are going to turn the tide in this election, and that's where my focus is.
And Jason Palmer, just finally, I mean, tonight will be an emotional night. You've got Joe Biden speaking to delegates. He'll be saying why he stood aside on account of his age and, you know, and some would say infirmity. I mean, will there be an emotional evening tonight in Chicago for you?
I do think it will be. I mean, I voted for Joe Biden 4 years ago, but I was also one of the earliest people to stand up and say he should pass the torch. He's reached a certain age where he's done a great job, but he needs to move on. And, you know, I do hope that the entire convention honors him. I do think he will get a standing ovation, but I do think we're also ready to turn the page and move on to the Tuesday programming.
OK. Listen, Jason Palmer, thank you for joining us, and let battle commence between Harris and Trump. Now, coming up next is State of the Nation, all the way from God's own county of Somerset. Jacob made me write that at the weekend. Jacob, welcome to Westminster. Are you in your drawing room there?
Absolutely, yes. I'm here with William Sitwell, who will be joining me for the programme. And mainly, we're going to be focusing on how Labour is featherbedding its own supporters, giving lots of money to its friends, to the unions who funded its election campaign.
Jacob, I've got to ask you about what you said at the weekend to the podcast and comedian Matt Ford. You said, in quotes, you are strongly thinking about standing again to be an MP. Now, it's just you and me talking. No one's watching or listening. Is that right? You're going to stand again in 2028 or 2029?
Well, I added the important caveat that I'd have to find somebody to select me. But I love being a member of the House of Commons and serving my constituents, and I would be very interested in getting back at some point. But we'll have to wait and see. But certainly it's something I'm thinking about very seriously.
Would you stand in this? I know your seat was wrapped up at the last election, but wherever the North East Somerset seat is, and you live in your seat, would you stand there and try and beat Labour's Dan Norris? He had a majority of over 5,000 last month.
Well, there were huge swings at the last election, and interestingly, the polls on this current government and on its satisfaction ratings have collapsed in the last, 6 weeks. So I wouldn't take these vote shares as being absolutely set in stone. They're not as if they've been handed to Moses. So we'll have to see, and we'll have to see if I can be selected somewhere.
OK, look, State of the Nation with Jackie Rees-Mogg live from God's own county of Somerset is up next. But first, here comes the weather with Alex Burkle.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, very good evening to you. Here's your latest GB News weather update brought to you by the Met Office. Plenty of showers as we go through tomorrow and some blustery, gusty winds too. But before then, there's a lot of cloud, there's a lot of rain because of a frontal system that's already made its way in from the west. And as we go through the next 12 hours or so, it's going to continue to push east and southeastwards, bringing quite a wet story across many parts of England and Wales for a time, with that rain feeding in